Yes, indeedy, folks. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Christmas time. The time of light and of joy and all that stuff. One thing I do like about it is getting a chance to, at least once a year, jot a little note to friends saying, hey there, still remember ya, and still think of ya. Then there are the wonderful snowstorms we get, nice and wet with big flakes. There is the occasional Christmas-colored young lady named Mary out in the hills taking pictures with her pinhole camera, old-fashioned roll-up film in a camera that doesn't even have a lens. Thin sheets of ice on the streams. Glorious snow on tree branches in the sunshine. What fortunate souls we are to celebrate this season in Idaho. When else can a picnic table make a perfect tent? The holidays are a wonderful time of year, and the holidays have been celebrated since the beginning of time. All religions, of course, have a great celebration at this time of year. All cultures have a great celebration at this time of year. And all of our records show these human institutions have celebrated this time of year throughout history. But we share the celebration of this time of year not just with those of other religions and other cultures. We share the celebration with all living things, for it is at this time of year that the light returns to the earth. Unless, of course, you're in the southern hemisphere, in which case it means you are celebrating the longest day of the year, and soon it might start to cool off. Of Saturn and Sun. A story of two great S words. Long before the empire we now remember as Rome, the peninsula that we now know as Italy was called Saturnalia. It was named after a great and mythical king of the area, based upon the Greek god Kronos. The family histories of Saturn and Kronos are certainly worthy of great gods. They are filled with intrigue, deceit, castration, and other bloody and grand events. We'll just have to get into those stories another day. Today, we're going to look at the great gifts that Saturnus gave to Italy, including its original name. Saturnus is the god that brought civilization and social order to the Italians. He was an agricultural god. Because of agriculture, of course, civilization was tamed from the wild, and Saturnus was honored as having brought this gift. It was understood by all that when Saturnus had ruled the area, there was peace, prosperity, and a golden age that had not been known since his fall. 498 years before the current era, the city of Rome built a great temple in honor of Saturn and Saturnus. It is the oldest building in what is known as the Roman Forum. The people of Rome understood that agriculture and Saturn were the reason that the city had such great wealth. Therefore, the treasury of the city was located in the temple. A special vault kept the city's gold and silver reserves. It held the archives, seal, and official metal scale for the city. It also held the bronze tablets on which Roman law was inscribed. Of course, the temple also held an image of the great god, the great agriculture, Saturn. The lower half of the representation of agriculture was kept wrapped in cloths, except once a year when a great celebration was held to commemorate the dedication of the temple. This great party, this nationwide fling, was held on December 17th. Now it turns out the ruling sign of agriculture and Saturn is Capricorn. And Capricorn begins with winter solstice on the 21st of December. Well, it wasn't long before the party was no longer just on the 17th, but stretched all the way to the 23rd. For 1,000 years, Roman society celebrated the temple and honored the golden age of Italy by celebrating Saturnalia. As popular gods came and went, for 1,000 years, the Romans kept honoring Saturn as a mainstay of both the common and the royal pantheon. Originally constructed between 501 and 498 before current era, the temple was rebuilt in 42 before current era and again in the 4th century current era. Saturnia grew in influence until it conquered the entire peninsula south of the Alps in 63 before current era under the great ruler Augustus. By this time, Saturnia had been referred to as Italia. Also by this time, the party known as Saturnalia had been practicing for 500 years, and it had become quite a hoop-to-do. One of the great traditions enjoyed by all was that it was a time to refresh the idea of equality. The roles of master and slave were reversed. The slave would be served at the table by the master. Even so, they were careful that in reversing the social order, they did not subvert it. It was common practice that the masters would serve a dinner that had been prepared by the slaves, and as soon as that was over, of course, the slaves would serve the dinner that they had prepared for the masters. Saturnalia was a school holiday, and no executions could be performed during Saturnalia, nor could wars be started. Gambling was allowed, even by slaves. Although historians are quick to put in parentheses, this does not mean that gambling did not occur the rest of the year. Everyone wore the same hat, a hat that designated a freed man. The formal white togas were thrown aside for the more colorful dinner clothes. Of course, some people took this way too far. And of course, gifts were exchanged to celebrate the great golden age and the generosity of the great god Saturn, the great gift of agriculture. An account of the time says that these gifts varied greatly, some expensive, some very cheap. For example, writing tablets, dice, knuckle bones, money boxes, combs, toothpicks, a hat, a hunting knife and axe, various lamps, balls, perfumes, pipes, a pig, a sausage, a parrot, tables, cups, spoons, items of clothing, statues, masks, books, and pets. One thing that the great mythical Saturnus had kept the Golden Age going by was settling of accounts. The Romans understood that prosperity is not built on perpetual debt. So, one of the traditions of the great celebration of Saturnalia was, when all the festivities were over, the tax collectors appeared. All money owed to governments, landlords, or debtors had to be accounted for. Well, I guess the winter solstice, when the sun begins to return, when life begins to come back, is as good a time to start out fresh and new as any. Saturnalia. It was a big party, and it was a very, very popular time for all of the citizens. 100 years, current era, a whole 600 years after the party began. The historian Pliny noted that Saturnalia was, quote, noisy with the license of the holidays and festive cries, end quote. Saturnalia was so popular and so interruptive of the daily life that, of course, some people tried to throw a wet blanket on it. Emperor Augustus tried to put a 3-day limit on the 7-day festival. The people ignored it. A few years later, Caligula, known for being a little excessive himself, tried to put a 5-day limit on Saturnalia. His limit did not even last as long as his short reign. And that is the story of Saturn and the great party Saturnalia, celebrating the opening of a great temple and flowing over into the celebration of what the astronomers at the time knew was the shortest day of the year, the winter solstice. Well, the astronomers and pretty well everyone else knew that the 21st was the shortest day of the year, but the ancients had a little trouble knowing for sure. The problem the ancients had lies in the amount the light changes every day, the difference between when the sun came up and when it sets from day to day. So the amount of light that there is during the day versus the amount of darkness. The fact is that days change very, very quickly. The amount of light changing every day happens very quickly during the equal times of the year, during the equinoxes. However, on the solstices, the times change very, very little. The sun coming up and going down is so minute. It is very, very hard to measure. It's merely a matter of minutes a day, if that. At the time, the only way the ancients had to measure the sun was by putting up a stone or a stick and measuring the movement of the shadow. By carefully measuring where the shadow falls relative to yesterday or the day before, you could tell whether the sun was returning or not. This was an ancient technique, of course. Many, many years before written history, many civilizations were building temples and different structures that, when you look at them, measure how the sun is in relationship to the earth on any one particular day, usually one of the solstices, either the summer solstice or the winter. They had to know whether the eternal cycle of life would begin again. In Rome, the very earliest day that they could say for absolutely sure that yes, the sun is returning was December 25th, what we call Christmas Day. The Romans had a day to celebrate the day that they knew for sure the sun was returning. They called it Sol Invictus, or in English, the invincible sun. Of course, the sun had been celebrated as one of the great gods, if not the greatest god, since mankind, or perhaps animal kind, became aware of the influence of energy and warmth on our lives. Probably about the time they went through their first winter, I would suppose. However, Sol Invictus celebrated not just the sun and its influence on life and the magic that it gives to the great wahoo, they specifically recognized Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun that had been going away from life, getting shorter and shorter, and now once again returns. Of course, emperors and those in power had long been usurping gods way before the popes and way before the kings to justify their place in society. This coin is from around 274 current era. On the back, we see Sol Invictus riding his ancient chariot across the sky and wearing a hat that has the radiating rays of the sun. On the other side of the coin, we see the Emperor Aurelian. Now, that's spelled Aurelian. And if you Latin scholars out there would like to call and let me know how you pronounce that, that would be fine by me. You'll notice that the emperor is wearing the same hat as the great god, the great Sol Invictus. Well, let's think about it, folks. Here you are in the middle of a great party after 7 days, and you've settled up all your accounts for the year. And 2 more days, there's another big holiday for the return of the sun. And the fact is, for half a year, you've been seeing the sun get lower and lower and lower in the sky. You don't really know for sure that the sun will be coming back. After all, the gods are as fickle as anybody else. These are not sciences. These are not ongoing the way gravity works with things. It's a god that is just as fickle as humans. And he might decide that enough is enough and just keep going to bed. Well, if the sun keeps descending, it won't be long before nothing else matters, will it? It certainly makes no sense not to eat all of the food and drink all of the wine if it just means that the sun isn't going to come back anyway. So the great party continued until Sol Invictus, and indeed it was known for sure that the cycle of life had begun again. Once again, you are going to have to make it through winter. Once again, you're going to have to go to work and raise the crops next year. So it wasn't until the 25th that they had one great big final bash in honor of Sol, the invincible, the returning. And now, a bedtime story of 3 wise and happy stars. The ancients watched the sun take a great arc in the sky, from the middle of the summer, when it was way overhead, until, as December 21st approached, it was getting lower and lower and lower upon the horizon. While the measurements and the theorists understood that 21st was the shortest day of the year, everyone else could only see the sun descending. The sun descending into darkness. The sun descending into Hades. Finally, the sun descended into Hades, where it remained for 3 days. 3 days of not knowing whether it would return. Because of the way the world works on its axis, the stars change, and they have moved about 30 degrees since the time of the Roman Empire around the time of Christ. At that time, on December 21st, winter solstice, when the sun went down the earliest and rose the latest, the three stars of Orion's belt were lined up exactly where the sun would be rising in the morning as the sun set at night. These three stars waited patiently, knowing the sun would return to life and the great cycle of being would continue. Some probably considered these stars a pathway for the sun to find its way back. Some considered these stars patient observers. The stars were known as the three wise men, the three kings, patiently waiting for what would surely be an arisen sun. The resurrection of life. The ages of a man. We believe in Santa Claus. We don't believe in Santa Claus. We are Santa Claus. And that's this week's Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Thanks for joining me. Hope you'll join me next week. And in the meantime, keep celebrating the Great Wahoo.